Today, we are digging into one of the most baffling criminal cases in American history. We're talking about a certified genius who terrorized an entire nation, a recluse who, weirdly, wanted an audience, a man the world came to know as the Unabomber. So let's get into the story of the man who decided to wage a one-man war on the modern world. For 17 years. Just think about that. From 1978 all the way to 1995, it was like a ghost was haunting the United States. A string of incredibly sophisticated handmade bombs started showing up in the mail. They were targeting academics, tech executives, and it just plunged the country into this state of fear. For 17 straight years, just opening your mail could be a death sentence. And when you look at the numbers, they're just grim. Over that time, he sent 16 bombs. 3 people were killed, and 23 others were injured. This wave of terror kicked off what would become the longest and, at the time, the most expensive investigation in the history of the FBI. So where did the name Unabomber even come from? Well, the FBI's internal case file was called Unabomb, which was just a simple acronym for his targets, universities and airlines. But you know how it is. The media came up with their own name, the Unabomber, and that's the one that stuck. For almost 2 decades, though, the question was always the same. Who is this guy, and what on earth is he trying to prove with all this violence? Well, the answer turned out to be more shocking than anyone could have possibly predicted. See, the architect of all this chaos wasn't some random, unhinged loner. He was a certified genius, a brilliant mathematician who had walked away from a super promising career to just disappear into the woods. So let me introduce you to Ted Kaczynski. With a tested IQ of 167, we're talking about a mind that was off the charts. He was so bright that he skipped 2 grades and got into Harvard on a scholarship when he was just 16 years old. His classmates called him a walking brain. But one of them said something that in hindsight is just chilling. He said Ted arrived emotionally unprepared. And it was at Harvard that Kaczynski took part in a really controversial and psychologically brutal study, which many people now believe is what really planted the seeds for his rage against technology. And this right here shows you the incredible paradox of his life. On one side, you've got this academic superstar. I mean, his PhD dissertation was so advanced that one of his professors guessed that maybe only 10 people in the entire country could even understand it. And on the other side, a guy who threw it all away to live in a tiny cabin in the Montana wilderness. In 1969, he just abruptly resigned from his teaching job at UC Berkeley and, well, he vanished. So what was the breaking point? What turns a guy living off the grid into a terrorist? Well, Kaczynski himself pointed to a very specific moment. In 1983, he was out hiking and discovered that a road had been built right through one of his favorite wild spots. He later said, "You just can't imagine how upset I was." And that's when his desire to just escape society twisted into a burning desire for revenge against it. And this revenge wasn't just about bombs. It was also about an idea. A sprawling 35,000-word essay that held all of his rage and his entire philosophy. An idea that he thought was so important, he was willing to kill to make sure people heard it. That is the very first sentence of his manifesto, which was called Industrial Society and Its Future. Talk about a bold opening. It's an uncompromising start to a document that would become his life's work, and also the thing that brought him down. Okay, so a key idea in his writing was this concept he called surrogate activities. He basically argued that because technology has pretty much solved all our basic survival needs, modern people are just left chasing these artificial goals to feel like they have a purpose. You know, things like work, entertainment, even activism. Think of it like a hamster on a wheel. You're running like crazy, but you're not actually going anywhere. So Kaczynski's argument was basically that technology wasn't just making our lives feel empty. He believed it was fundamentally taking away our freedom. He thought the system has to control people to keep itself going, and that you couldn't reform it from the inside. In his mind, the bombings were an extreme, but a necessary tactic to force everyone to pay attention to his message. So after almost 2 decades, the FBI was still chasing a ghost. The big break in the case didn't come from forensics or some clever detective work. It came from a family's painful moment of recognition. So, how does the longest manhunt in FBI history finally come to an end? Well, the answer is tied up in the Unabomber's single greatest gamble. All right, so here's exactly how it all went down. Kaczynski, who was desperate for his ideas to get out there, demanded that major newspapers publish his manifesto. The FBI actually agreed, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would recognize the author's voice. And someone did. His own brother David read it and was just struck by the familiar arguments and the unique way of writing. After an agonizing decision, he contacted the authorities. The Unabomber was unmasked by his very own words. So David's tip pointed the FBI to this exact spot, a tiny, isolated cabin in Lincoln, Montana, with no electricity and no running water. This is where a former math prodigy had been plotting his war against society, basically hiding in plain sight for years. His arrest was the end of the manhunt, for sure, but it was just the beginning of a really complex and, frankly, disturbing debate about his ideas that is still going on to this day. So here's a quick look at the timeline. It all starts with that first bomb in 1978, and it ends with his death in prison in 2023. But the key date, as we've seen, was 1995. That's when he took that huge gamble and got his manifesto published. It was the beginning of the end for him. When agents searched his cabin, there was absolutely no doubt they had the right guy. They found a mountain of evidence: bomb-making materials, another finished bomb just ready to be sent, and, the most chilling part, 40,000 pages of journals. In his own handwriting, he had meticulously documented everything: his bomb experiments, how he picked his targets, and his cold-blooded reason for the killings, which he just called revenge. In the end, to avoid the death penalty, Kaczynski pleaded guilty. And it's worth noting, he actually fought his own lawyers, who wanted to argue he was insane. He rejected that completely. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of ever getting out, which put a stop to his reign of terror for good. And yet, almost immediately, the debate over his ideas started up. This quote here from the political scientist James Q. Wilson really gets to the heart of the dilemma. It highlights this really uncomfortable truth. While his actions were absolutely monstrous, you couldn't easily dismiss the core of his critique of technology as just the ravings of a madman. Now, decades later, his legacy is, well, it's messy. Some of the very people you'd think he would have targeted, like tech leaders and futurists, have actually admitted that some of his warnings were pretty insightful. And his manifesto has found this strange second life online, inspiring whole communities that try to separate his philosophy from his horrific violence. Look, let's be crystal clear. Ted Kaczynski was a murderer. His methods were monstrous, and there's no debating that. But in a world that is more and more dominated by the very systems he was railing against, we're left with a really unsettling question. Were his warnings about technology, if not his methods, kind of prophetic? That's something for you to think about.